The second word in the title of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching presents us with some serious problems in translation. Te is ordinarily translated virtue, but virtue as we understand it today isn't at all appropriate. Te means virtue in the sense that we speak of the healing virtues of a plant. In the section of the Lao Tzu where the term is introduced, the text reads literally, superior virtue, not virtue, thus it has virtue. The idea of virtue cannot let go of virtue, thus it is not virtue. A smoother translation is, superior virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue, therefore it is virtue. The idea of virtue is so hooked on being virtuous that it is not virtue. Te means the excellence of things in the sense that a tree excels at being a tree. There is no way to imitate a tree. The only way is to be one. In the same way, when a human being shows extraordinary skill at something, it seems that it comes naturally to him. Nothing artificial is apparent, and if there is some discipline involved, it is concealed. Such artless excellence seems like magic, and in Te there is a connection between virtue and magic. Everything is fundamentally in harmony with the Tao. It is said that Tao is that from which nothing can depart, and that from which things can depart is not the Tao. Fundamentally, then, we cannot get away from it. It is as if we are all floating in a tremendous river which carries us along. Some people may swim against the river, yet they are still being carried along. Others have learned the art of swimming with the river. They are carried along too, but they are aware of it. They know they are being carried along, whereas the people who are swimming against the river think they are going in the opposite direction, though they're not really. We have to flow with the river. There is no other way. We can swim against it, and pretend not to be flowing with it, but we still are. What's more, the person who gives up that pretense, who realizes one is inevitably carried by the river and swims with it, suddenly acquires behind everything they do the force of the river. The person swimming against the river does not, by his action, express the power of the river. On the other hand, the person swimming with it rides the river's force and has behind them the whole river, the power of which they can subtly direct. They can change direction in the river, going to the left or the right as a ship uses a rudder to steer in the current, or if he is more skillful still, he can tack. When a sailboat tacks, it sails against the wind, yet it still uses the wind to blow it along. That is the most skilled art of all. That is perfection in Taoism. Te is a kind of intelligence that invites cooperation, so that the desired end is accomplished without unnecessary effort. For example, instead of forcing others to agree with you, you can give them the notion that the idea you want them to have is their own. In the same way, when you want to teach a baby to swim, you can put the baby in the water and then move backwards with the baby to create a vacuum. This pulls the baby along, and it learns the feel of the water and eventually how to swim on its own. The Tao Te Ching is a book written for several purposes. We may take it as a guide to mystical understanding of the universe, or we may take it as a dissertation on the principles of nature, almost a handbook of natural law. We may also take it as a political treatise, a book of wisdom for governors, and on this subject the basic principle that it advocates is the virtue of governing, not by ruling. Suppose the President of the United States were as unknown to you by name as the local sanitary inspector, the person who looks after the drains and the sewage disposal. The inspector may not be a glamorous figure, but for that very reason he probably does his job more efficiently than the President. The President wastes an enormous amount of time meeting with various groups, conferring honors, and so forth, and with all of the ceremonial functions the poor man's life must be in utter torment. He is so well known that he has little time to give to the government of the country. Just think of his mail, and all the people who have to be employed sifting it out and assessing it. If he were someone quite anonymous, so that we did not have to think about him, he would be a very good ruler in just the same way, for example, as are the systems that govern your own body's functions. You do not have to attend to your body unless you are sick. The government of your body happens automatically, going on day after day after day. The better it is, the less you have to think about it. On the deepest level, a person can get in the way of his own existence by becoming too aware of himself. Such a person lacks the quality of te. The Taoists propose to help people get back to Tao and the state of te, so that they will not get in their own way. The key, they say, is in the idea of being empty. Emptiness, being vacant, is the secret of all things. The highest kind of knowledge is not know-how, but know-how, N-O. To be able to achieve things with know-how, that is, without any method. This is done through something called fasting the heart. The Chinese word xin is translated as heart, but it does not mean heart in the physiological sense. Pronounced xin, it is in fact a part of the character te, and its meaning is closer to heart-mind or psychic center. Xin is also frequently translated as mind, and in all the Zen texts where the term no mind is used, the actual word is wu-shin, Japanese mu-shin. The most desirable kind of heart, then, is absence of heart. In English, heartless is very bad, as does the word mindless mean. A heartless person is an inconsiderate and unfeeling person, and a mindless person is an idiot. But in Chinese Buddhism and Taoism, a person who has mushin, no mind or no heart, is a person of very high order. His psychic center does not get in his own way, and it operates as if it was not there. Lao Tzu said that the highest form of man uses his shin like a mirror. It grasps nothing, it refuses nothing, it receives but does not keep. And the poem says, when the geese fly over the water, and they are reflected in the water, the geese do not intend to cast the reflection, and the water has no mind to retain their image. The art of living is to operate in the world as if you were absent. As a matter of fact, this is built into us physiologically. Let me ask you simply, what is the color of your head from the standpoint of your eyes? You feel that your head is black, or that it has no color at all. Outside, you see your field of vision as an oval because your two eyes act as two centers of an ellipse. But what is beyond the field of vision? What color is it where you can't see? It's not black, and this is an important point. There is no color at all beyond your field of vision. This little mental exercise gives us an idea of what is meant by the character xian. Although its dictionary definition is dark, deep, obscure, it actually refers to this kind of no color that is the color of your head as far as your eyes are concerned. Perhaps we could say that the invisibility of one's head, in a certain sense, the lack of a head, is the secret of being alive. To be headless, or to have no head, in just the sense I am talking about, is our way of talking about the Chinese expression wu xin, or no mind. As a matter of fact, if you want to see the inside of your head, all you have to do is keep your eyes open, because all that you are experiencing in the external visual field is the state of your brain. All the colors and shapes you see are the way in which the brain nerves translate the electrical impulses in the external world outside the envelope of skin. They translate all of what is going on outside into impulses, which are, to us, shape and color. However, shape and color are states of the nerves, so that what you see when your eyes are open is how it feels inside your head. You do not see your brain as an internal, undulating structure. You see your brain as everything outside. In this way, the emptiness of one's head is a condition of seeing, and the transparency of the eye lens is the condition of seeing colors. The 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart said, "Because my eye has no color, it is able to discern color." And this is a restatement of the fundamental Taoist idea of being absent as a condition of being present, being not there so as to be there. Lao Tzu says, "When your belt is comfortable, you don't feel it. When your shoes are comfortable, it is as if you were not wearing any." The more aware you are of these things, the less well they are made, or the less well they fit. We may raise a very simple objection to this, which is that if I don't know I am here, I seem to be missing everything. We want to know that we know. If we are happy, and we do not know we are happy, we might as well not be happy. To know that you are happy is really the overflowing of the cup of life. The downside of this principle is to be miserable and know that you are miserable. Some people are miserable without knowing it. But you know my limerick. There was a young man who said, though it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know. Of course, this is the great human predicament, the develop of self-consciousness, the development of the possibility of reflecting upon one's own knowledge, which is simultaneously a blessing and a curse. Taoism does not escape this problem, and it does not avoid it. It deals with it, but it does not deal with it obviously. It floats lightly over it. Lao Tzu said, "It is easy enough to stand still. The difficulty is to walk without touching the ground." He is referring to the fact that in the state of being in accord with the Tao, there is a certain feeling of weightlessness, parallel to the weightlessness that people feel when they float in space or when they go deep down into the ocean. This is, of course, connected with the sensation that you are not carrying your body around, which I compare to the experience of an expert driver when he really is with it in a car. When the hill lifts him up and drops him off the other side, there is a sense of weightlessness, and he and the road are all one process. Then, of course, there is the song, "Walking on air, never a care, something is making me sing, tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, like a little bird in spring." What is this weightlessness? It means that you are not moving around in constant opposition to yourself. Most people move in constant opposition to themselves because they are afraid that if they do not oppose themselves all the time, they will lose control and something awful will happen. When the human being developed the power to be aware of himself, to know that he knows, in other words, when the cortex was formed over the original brain, he fell from grace. That was the fall of man, because when he felt the sensation of being in charge, of being in control of himself, he became anxious. Am I aware enough of myself? Have I taken enough factors into consideration? Have I done all that should be done? When he asked these questions of himself for the first time, he started to tremble, and this was the fall of man. This is also what Lao Tzu means when he says, "When the great Tao was lost, there came duty to man and right conduct." In other words, nobody talks about how you ought to behave unless things have gone radically wrong. There would not be any conception of faithful ministers of the state unless there were a lot of lousy politicians around. No one would talk about filial piety unless there were wayward sons and daughters. According to the Taoists, moral preaching is the source of confusion. There is a marvelous story about a conversation between Confucius and Lao Tzu, in which Lao Tzu asked Confucius to explain to him about charity and duty to one's neighbor. In reply, Confucius gave him a little sermon on giving up self-interest and working for others, to which Lao Tzu replied, "What stuff, sir! Regard the universe. The stars came out invariably every night. The sun rises and sets, the birds flock and migrate without exception, all flowers and trees grow upwards without exception. You, with your charity and duty to one's neighbor, you are just introducing confusion into the realm. Your attempt to eliminate self is a manifestation of selfishness. You are like a person beating a drum in search of a fugitive." All talk about selfishness, and all talk about becoming virtuous or enlightened or integrated or non-neurotic or self-actualized attest to the fact that it has not happened, and such talk will in fact get in the way of its happening. The Taoist sage Lietzu, who lived somewhat later than Lao Tzu, was known for his ability to ride on the wind. Before acquiring this skill, Lietzu found a very great master and went to study with him. The master lived in a small hut, and Lietzu sat outside the hut, but the master paid absolutely no attention to him. Of course, this is the way with Taoist masters. Why would they want students, since they have nothing to teach? After a year of sitting outside, Lietzu went away because he was fed up with waiting so long. Then he became regretful about leaving and thought he really should make an attempt, so he went back to the master. When the master saw him approach, he said, "Why this ceaseless coming and going?" So Lietsu sat there and tried to control his mind, so that he would not think of the difference between gain and loss, so that he could live in such a way that nothing is either an advantage or a disadvantage. There is a marvelous story about this perspective. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away, and all the neighbors came around to commiserate that evening. "So sorry to hear your horse has run away. This is most unfortunate," the farmer said. "Maybe." The next day the horse came back bringing 7 wild horses with it, and everyone came back in the evening and said, "Oh, isn't that lucky? What a great turn of events. You now have 8 horses." And the farmer said, "Maybe." The next day his son tried to break one of those horses and ride it, but he was thrown and broke his leg, and they all said, "Oh dear, that's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The following day the conscription officers came around to conscript people into the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. Again all the people came around and said, "Isn't that great?" And he said, "Maybe." The farmer steadfastly refrained from thinking of things in terms of gain or loss, advantage or disadvantage, because one never knows. Receiving a letter from a law office tomorrow saying that some distant relative of yours has left you $1 million might make you feel very happy, but the windfall may well lead to unbelievable disaster, including a visit from the Internal Revenue Service, just to mention one possibility. In fact, we never really know whether an event is fortune or misfortune. We only know our ever-changing reactions to ever-changing events. The Taoist is wise enough to understand eventually that there is not any fixed good or bad. This point of view is called non-choosing. To return to Lietsu, he attempted to keep his mind in a state of non-choosing, but it is very difficult to overcome one's habits of feeling and thinking. After he had practiced this for a year, the master looked at him and recognized he was there. After another year's practice, the master invited him to come and sit inside his hut. Then something changed, and Lietsu did not try to control his mind anymore. He described what he did. "I let my ears hear whatever they wanted to hear. I let my eyes see whatever they wanted to see. I let my feet move wherever they wanted to go. I let my mind think of whatever it wanted to think. And it was a very strange sensation, because all my bodily existence seemed to melt and become transparent and to have no weight. I don't know whether I was walking on the wind or the wind was walking on me." We insist, however, that there are events. We observe events, we remember events, and they make an impression on us. Yet, in the psychology of Taoism, there is no difference between the observer and what is observed. We are only the observation of life from a certain point of view. We create an opposition between the thinker and the thought, the experiencer and the experience, and the knower and the known, because we think about knowledge in terms of certain metaphors. The metaphor of the stylus on the writing sheet, the reflection on the mirror. All these sorts of images are part of our idea of knowledge. But the Taoist theory of knowledge is quite different. There is no knower facing the known. And if there is any knower at all, it contains the known. Your mind, if you have one, is not in your head. Instead, your head is in your mind, because your mind, understood from the standpoint of vision, is space. The Chinese use the word kung, which means sky, space, or emptiness. Se means both shape and color. The famous lines of the Heart Sutra declare that space, emptiness, is precisely shape. Color and shape. Color is precisely space, emptiness. What we call space contains the myriads of shapes and colors and bodies and weights and so on. It does not reflect them as a mirror, but it is the absence which guarantees their presence, and it is their presence which guarantees absence. There is a mutual arising between voidness and form, between existence and non-existence, between being and non-being, and these are forever felt as alternatives or elements that are in some kind of contest. When we say, then, that there is not any thinker behind thoughts, nor any experiencer that experiences, this is a way of saying that experiencing or knowing is not an encounter between strangers. Western thought concentrates very much on knowledge as an encounter, and talks about facing facts, facing reality, as if somehow or other the knower and the known came from 2 completely different worlds and met each other. The phenomenon of knowledge is almost the precise opposite of that. Instead of being a collision between two wandering bodies in space, knowledge is much more like the expansion of a flower from its stem, where stem and flower are knower and the known, the expression of something that lies between them. We tend in all our metaphors and common speech to think of life as a process that has polarized itself, coming out from a center and expressing itself in terms of opposites. Of course, this is the basis of the whole yang and yin principle, illustrated as two interlocked fishes. It is a fascinating emblem because it is a helix, and it is the formation of a spiral nebula, and it is the position of sexual intercourse. I am trying to get to the middle of you. You are trying to get to the middle of me. Neither one of us exists without the other. The yang is the light, and yin is the dark. Yang originally meant the sunny south side of a mountain, and yin the dark north side. Yang is the north bank of a river, which gets the sun. Yin is the south bank, which is in the shade. Now there are no mountains with only one side. The mountain, if it is a mountain at all, goes up and down like a wave. There are no waves with a crest, but no trough, or a trough with no crest, because you can't have half a wave. Yang and yin are quite different from each other, but just because they are different, they are identical, and this is the important idea of the identical difference. The saying in both Taoism and Buddhism is that difference is identity, identity is difference. The Chinese word for is not quite the same as our word. It somewhat resembles that, so we might render the statement difference that identity, identity that difference. This does not quite mean A is B, but that A is in relation to B, or A goes with B, or A necessarily involves B. Difference necessarily involves identity. Identity necessarily involves difference. So there is no yang without yin, and there is no yin without yang. When I first started studying these things, I was terribly bothered by how on earth I was going to see this multi-differentiated world as a unity. What was going to happen? What was it like to be What was it going to be like to see all things are one? The sages keep saying all things are one, but they all look so different to me. All these people act in different ways, and they have all their houses and their cars and all this and that. The whole world looked full of the most bony, prickly differences. I thought, well, what is supposed to happen? Is this supposed to be as if your eyesight blurred and all these things floated together? What is this experience of nirvana or of liberation supposed to be? Why do the Hindu sages write about it just as if it was a kind of dissolution of everything? It took me a long time, and suddenly one day I realized that the difference I saw between things was the same thing as their unity, because differences, borders, lines, surfaces, boundaries, do not really divide things from each other at all. They join them together, and all boundaries are held in common. It is like a territory that has been divided up into property, and this is your property and this is my property. But if I live next to you, your fence is my fence, and we hold the boundary in common. We may make up silly arrangements as to who is responsible for the maintenance of this fence, but nevertheless we hold our boundaries in common. And we would not know where my plot of land was unless we knew the definition of your plot of land, and the plot of land that is adjoining. I saw then that my sense of me being me was exactly the same thing as my sensation of being one with the whole cosmos. I did not need to have some other sort of different, odd kind of experience to feel in total connection with everything. Once you get the clue, you see that the sense of unity is inseparable from the sense of difference. You would not know yourself, or what you meant by self, unless at the same time you had the feeling of other. Now the secret is that the other eventually turns out to be you. The element of surprise in life is when suddenly you find the thing most alien turns out to be yourself. Go out at night and look at the stars and realize that they are millions and billions of miles away, vast conflagrations far out in space. You can lie back and look at that and say, well, surely I hardly matter. I am just a tiny little speck aboard this weird, spotted bit of dust called Earth, and all that was going on out there billions of years before I was born and will still be going on billions of years after I die. Nothing seems stranger to you than that, or more different from you Yet there comes a point, if you watch long enough, when you will say, "Well, that's me." It is the other that is the condition of your being yourself, as the back is the condition of being the front. And when you know that, you know you never die.